And hello and welcome to another episode of the Infobotts Podcast. I am your host, author Frederick Fishman, for this episode number 52. And today and every day we are sponsored by me, so for links to all my books, apparel, and gear, go to our main Infobotts website at infobotts.com, spelled with two T's at the end, and that's infobotts.com. You can also help us out by visiting our Patreon page at patreon.com/Infobotts Podcast. Okay, let's get started. "100 years ago, the Spanish flu, an influenza that killed over 50 million people worldwide after 4 waves by 1920, was spreading in the middle of World War I. Schools and businesses were closed, and many locations around the world ordered people to wear masks to curtail the spread of the flu. And, of course, there were people then, as now, who protested the mandatory orders to wear masks. Was it vanity or nobody tells me what to do attitude that drove the anger about being forced to wear a mask? Groups were formed ad hoc to protest, like the Anti-Mask League. In 1919, they had a rally in San Francisco to denounce the mask ordinance and strategies to defeat these countrywide ordinances. Does any of what I just said sound familiar? Do you remember the scene shown on news videotape during the spring of this year of people carrying assault rifles in the Michigan Capitol building protesting the governor's mask orders? Back in 1917 and 1918, 100 years ago, the scale of the disease then as now caused worldwide panic. Closures in schools, churches were commonplace. People were afraid to go out in public. They isolated in their homes. Here's a quote from the Rocky Mountain News in Denver in 1918. The mayor of Denver was speaking about masks. Quote, "The wearer is not only protecting himself, but is protecting others. It is the moral obligation of every person to wear a mask in a streetcar or in a store." End quote. The story went on 102 years ago to say that the mask mandate was almost totally ignored by the people back then. In fact, the order was a cause of mirth. Sir Alexander Fleming, a Scottish researcher, is credited with the discovery of penicillin in 1928. At the time, Fleming was experimenting with the influenza virus in the laboratory of the inoculation department at St. Mary's Hospital in London. That was 10 plus years into the pandemic 100 years ago. In 1928, 10 years. We are now only 6 months in the coronavirus pandemic. By the end of the pandemic, back in 1918, 675,000 Americans and 50 million people died. We are now closing in within a few days of 200,000 Americans dead. Yesterday, my wife and I were standing in the checkout line at a local Walmart, and as we pulled away, a rather large, rotund, middle-aged woman was unloading her cart onto the counter. No mask. She was huffing and coughing from exertion. The Walmart clerk said nothing. No Walmart management stopped to talk to the woman. We said nothing. We just went on our way. I said this a while back about the flu. Influenza in this country, now with decades of flu vaccines being offered right now. Still, 35 million Americans contract the flu every year, and 35,000 Americans every year still die from the flu each year. In the last 6 months, nearly 200,000 people have died from the coronavirus. It doesn't take a medical genius to understand that 2020 to 2022 is going to have a larger death rate than 1917 to 1919. And so now you know. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Infobotts Podcast. Please support our efforts here to bring you a new Infobotts Podcast every day. Go to our website at patreon.com/Infobotts Podcast. That's patreon.com/Infobotts Podcast. Please join us again for another episode of Infobotts. Bye-bye.